Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer. Welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And this is a special episode as we launch an 80-week journey into the filmography of legendary director John Ford. And joining me for this first episode is one of my frequent collaborators and friends, Foster.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be the first episode.
There you go. It is a special honor. And soon, hopefully, I'll be getting to see Foster in person just as long as Tom Cruise doesn't pull his shit and get Oppenheimer and Barbie to change their release dates.
Yes. I'm excited for Barbenheimer. Uh,
Barbenheimer.
which one of those two are you more excited for?
Well, here's the thing. Obviously, one of them we're going to have a lot more fun with, and one of them's not going to be any fun at all. Just 3 hours of like from just like a film perspective, probably Oppenheimer, because I'm really interested to see how he makes this 3 hour epic out of a biopic about a guy who made the atomic bomb. But like Barbie just looks so much fun. So
Hmm.
much fun. But we won't be doing coming attractions for those quite yet. We're doing a much more bland and interesting week of films coming out. But for those who have not tuned in to Welcome to the Wasteland before, we do coming attractions, go to our feature of the week, and then give you some recommendations. But just to give a little backstory, so I take a couple of different approaches to figuring out the directors that I do on this channel, and it's time to tell you the story of how John Ford got picked. So I wanted to shake things up and randomly select somebody out of a list of 260 directors. So there was a 1 in 260 chance somebody was going to get picked here. And my wife, we had just watched The Fablemans. And she's like, how weird would it be if you got John Ford? How weird would it be, Foster, that 1 out of 260 chance that it landed on John Ford? And then I'm like,
Pretty weird.
yep. And it did. So I randomly selected it with my random integer generator from my TI-84 Silver Edition calculator. So Foster will appreciate that. But the thing is, he has 120 directing credits. I had to trim through because some of them aren't available. And now we're down to 80. So I'll be doing John Ford through the end of 2024. Um, Crazy thing is, I could have landed on him, or I could have landed on somebody like Jordan Peele, where I would have been done in 3 weeks. So but this is how we landed, and we're getting things started. But before we jump into his feature film debut, Straight Shooting, we're going to be talking about our coming attractions, which there's an interesting mix of a lot of very small indie films coming out this weekend, and then Transformers Rise of the Beasts. And then over on Hulu, Ava Longoria and her movie Flamin' Hot. So, but Foster, what are you? Let me rephrase this.
Yeah,
Which one are
be
you going
careful.
to talk about if we're coming attractions?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Transformers Rise of the Beasts. I don't know that I'd say I'm looking forward to it necessarily. To be honest, I don't think I'm going to see it in theaters, but I think over the summer, my last day of work is like in 2 weeks, and then I'm going to be plowing through movies like nobody's business. I would like to go through all the Transformers movies just because I've seen the first three, but it's been so long, and I
Mhm.
saw Bumblebee. And not that the others are necessarily worth watching, but it's just like they're huge movies. And like if you're a movie person, it always pains me a little bit when people talk about like Transformers and Fast and Furious, and I'm like the movie person and I haven't seen those franchises in their entirety. So I got to just finish those out over the summer. So I will see this movie at some point in time. That's the best I can do for my anticipation level. The one thing that I guess I wouldn't say excites me necessarily, but maybe intrigues me is Stephen Caple Jr. is doing the directing, and he did Creed 2. I think
Yep.
that's like his first or second movie, Creed 2, and I really liked Creed 2. I actually think I liked it more than most other people. Like I thought he kind of nailed it. It was like the perfect hype me up type of like sports
Mhm.
movie. Um, and I just saw some interviews of him back when he was doing Creed 2, and he just seemed like a nice guy who was kind of down to earth, who just kind of got lucky with this big gig too. And so it's kind of cool that he's doing a huge Transformers movie now. So good for him. And I hope it's good.
Well, I there's a couple of things too for me because after Travis Knight did Bumblebee, and I really like Bumblebee a lot.
Bumblebee's good, yeah.
Yeah, and I hope this is more in that vein.
Hmm.
This does look bigger
Hmm.
because when you have like a world devouring Unicron villain, the stakes are a little bit higher, I guess,
A little bit.
and scale. But based off of the trailers, it looks like there's some interesting like one shot action sequences in the film where I'm just like, oh my god, it's not just a bunch of explosions crashing together.
Hmm.
Because I'm just happy that this franchise isn't in Michael Bay's hands anymore.
Hmm.
um and I'm interested to see how this one turns out because also I was a huge Beast Wars fan. Like
Hmm.
I watched the animated show, which my God, looking at clips now, I'm just like, this is some of the most horrendous CGI I've ever in my
Hmm.
life. But like I was such a big fan of that show and like the Beast Wars Transformer toys. So like I'm excited on that level with it. There's a lot of other films, like I mentioned, Flaming Hot. The one that I'm gonna at least put a spotlight on, it's kind of cheating because I've seen it already, is Blue Jean. It has one of the best performances that I've seen all year, and it's in my top 15 movies of the year so far. It is a very moving film about a teacher who's a lesbian, who's closeted, and trying to navigate when one of her students finds out, kind
Uh,
of thing. And it's a really, really good movie that I was really impressed by. So at least a little spotlight on that one. So if you could get around to it when it pop up on VOD, or if it's in a theater near you, give that one some love. But I will be seeing both as we're recording, the next 2 days I'll be seeing Transformers and Flamin' Hot. So
yeah.
we'll see how they turn out.
One other selling point, I just looked it up. So the run times of the past couple Transformers movies, The Last Night was 2 hours 34 minutes. Age of Extinction was 2 hours 45. This is under 2 hours. It's only an hour 57.
Yep.
That's the selling point right there.
Absolutely. But those are our coming attractions. And now we're going to be talking about straight shooting. And so this is John Ford's directorial debut for feature debut. It's starring Harry Carey Sr., so a pretty big name in early cinema. This actually survived at the George Eastman House at the International Museum of Photography and Film. So they are able to preserve a copy of this like hour 11-ish minute film. Uh, at one point, it was cut up by censors, and the reasoning was for murder and outlawry. It's, it's a Western.
That's the
No
description on
crap.
the that would be the description on the MPAA rating if it came out today.
Yep. Murder and outlawry. I want to see outlawry come back as an official reason for ratings.
One of my favorites is Dark Knight. It was like some frightening imagery and menace.
Nice. Interesting. So, Francis Ford, the older brother of John Ford, passed on this film but encouraged his brother to direct it. So,
Mhm.
this was kind of like his gateway into doing this film. Carey and Ford really hit it off on set and wound up becoming long-term frequent collaborators. The whole entire film was shot on the Universal backlot,
Mhm.
as movies do back then. This is the best part. So John Ford was only given enough money to make a two-reel film. So like
Mhm.
films that like he was doing at the time. He lied to Universal and told them that his original prints fell in a river. And they gave him more like film to go reshoot the movie, which then he used to finish the second half of the movie that he was actually making. Universal was apparently very mad, but Carl Lemley was just like, so if you went in to go get a suit tailored and they gave you an extra pair of pants, would you throw the pants out? So obviously they kept the film, released the film, and that's straight shooting.
Mhm.
So Foster, what are some of your general thoughts on the film?
Okay, so I mean, I wanted to see this one. I picked this one just because it's the first one. So it's not
Mhm.
like I was necessarily like hyped to watch
Yeah.
this movie. I mean, to be honest, until like 5 minutes before I pressed play, it didn't even occur to me that of course this is a silent movie.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of John Ford, I'm thinking of the like the Searchers and Stagecoach and all those movies. But I mean, it makes sense, of course, because it's 1917. Um, but I mean, it's always cool to just see the first movie from a huge director, and you can kind of see the little hints of
Mm.
what's to come later on in his career. And yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't say I enjoyed the movie, but like as like an exercise, I thought it was really interesting to watch, and you definitely can tell that it's him in some moments. I think there's like a lot of like characters framed inside of doorways and windows and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and like some like the Western settings, of course, and some harsh weather and some like strong character profile shots and some pretty killer hats I noticed, particularly one like in the last like 10 minutes of the movie. There's a hat in there that deserved the Oscar, I think, for best supporting actor. Um,
I made a I made a comment to my wife about that the one hat that was like this tall
oh yeah,
and
baby.
it looked like the guy from Curious George's hat.
Yep,
Pretty impressive hat work here.
truly, yes.
I thought it was really interesting from the first frame. You have this shot that has such deep focus of
Mm,
like
yeah.
in the front of the frame is this man on a horse and everything, and you see in the background this whole entire herd of cattle and everything. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, whoa. Like it's funny because each month I'm doing my Cinematic Wasteland podcast where I look through each year of cinema, and I'm just finished my 1905 one. So like even just seeing like what you see in a film in 1905 to 1917 and like um that kind of shot was impressive because it's
Yeah.
like there's so much depth to it and what it was able to do with it. And of course there's definitely some of those like big landscape shots that you see from John Ford and such. And the basic gist of this movie is you have Sweetwater Sims, who's a man who has his own farm and he has a son, he has a daughter, and there's a rancher named what was it, Thunderbolt Flint or some
Thunderflint, yeah.
Thunder Flint, who's not really a big fan because and this is interesting because I saw a lot of Shane in this movie because it's that like farmer versus rancher kind of conflict.
Hmm.
And then you have Cheyenne Harry, played by Harry Carey,
Hmm.
who is this like gunslinger who's like brought into the fray.
Hmm.
And I'm like, there's a lot of like narrative beats that I feel like Shane draws upon, which actually, that's a good question. Should have done a little extra homework on when the book Shane was published
Mm.
because okay, the book was from 1949. So I
Okay.
feel like because like if it was a much older book, I could have imagined like that was drawn upon for this, but
Yeah.
maybe who wrote the book was a big fan of some of these early John Ford films because it feels like it brings in some of those narrative threads because that's the conflict between like farmers and ranchers, stuff like that. You have this gunslinger, Cheyenne Harry, who's brought in, who's like very much that Shane character that Harry Carey
Mm.
plays. But if kind of drawing upon that kind of story or heavily influencing something like Shane, and I feel like there's a couple of performances that stood out to me a little bit more than just like, standard silent movie acting of like, and just like, where it's just like obnoxiously
Yeah,
over the top acting. Because I do feel like Duke R. Lee, who plays Flint, he just has a presence about him, and of course, a lot of mustaches. A lot of
yeah.
mustaches in this movie, but like he has like this big presence about him and how he carries himself. And then I feel like George Barrel, who plays Sweetwater Sims,
Yeah.
really gets some moments because at one point the whole changing of the film is his son Tim gets shot,
Hmm.
and that's when like Cheyenne Harry's like, nah, I can't do this anymore, kind of thing. But like
Yeah.
Barrel gives a really strong performance in like selling the grief at like
It's also
his
like the
grave.
his look. He
Yeah,
just looks, he has the farmer like he doesn't look like anybody else in this movie.
exactly. As a giant, like he looks like Karl Marx or Charles Darwin, just like
Yeah.
so much hair, giant
Hmm.
beard. But were there any particular things that stood out to you, Foster?
Um, not in the way of necessarily like performances or characters. I mean, I like just filmmaking wise, I feel like for a first movie, it is pretty ambitious.
Mhm.
Like with all, like imagine your first kind of like feature length in quotes movie, has like all those people on horseback riding down, winding through the
Yeah.
mountains, like especially that shootout at the end. It's
Mhm.
like it's a little clunky compared to like what he does later on in like Stagecoach, that chase sequence, for example, but like it's still pretty impressive for a first movie, and it's fairly cohesive, and it's big scale for something that you're just starting out. So that stands out to me. I mean, it feels weird to say things on the negative ends, but I will say I don't know that I necessarily know any of these characters well enough to have
Mhm.
much of an investment at all because it is so short, and because like you're introduced to the Sims family in like 2 minutes at the beginning with like
Yep.
just a couple title cards, and you don't. So it's like I don't really care all that much if the son dies, and sorry to say, sorry to him and his family, rest in peace. But then when Cheyenne Harry also has his kind of like turn of heart or whatever, like he says something about how like there are some crimes or whatever that are even too far gone for me, and I'm thinking like, what is too far gone for you? I don't know who you are. I don't really know what
Yeah.
your life was like before this. Like, were you like an intense murderer before this? If so, this shouldn't be too far. Or were you like really like low key, this is the craziest it's ever been, because I don't even know this character, so like it
Well, yeah,
doesn't
because he
mean
has one line of dialogue where he's like shooting a man in the back.
yeah, so like the turn doesn't mean much to me if I don't know these characters all that well, but I don't know, I mean it's hard to complain really because of the context and what it is, and also like you're saying, compared to other movies that were coming out at this time too, that's something you have to do. Side note, sometimes if people complain about like Citizen Kane, for instance, like, oh, why is that considered the best movie ever made? I'm thinking like, so you've just watched Citizen Kane then and no other movies from like the 30s or 40s? Because if you watch like a couple other movies from that time period and then watch Citizen Kane, it is mind-blowing like how modern it feels. So
Mhm.
I'm betting it's a similar thing to what you're saying, having just watched all the 1905 movies. Like some of the like the deep focus, or like you have stuff in the foreground like inside the farm, and then you see through the window there's another scene happening behind outside the window. Like it's a
Yeah.
lot of planning and coordination, and it's a lot for something from this year.
Well, yeah, because especially at the beginning, like at the dawn of cinema, a lot of the times it was like a stationary camera and you're just doing stuff in front of it.
Hmm.
That's it. Like it took to like Edwin S. Porter to actually like, oh my God, there's scenes inside and outside.
Hmm.
And like I think two scenes that really stood out to me was one, that standoff between
Oh yeah.
Cheyenne Harry and that one guy in the town, where it was
Yeah.
like slowly building up that tension.
Yeah.
And I feel like there was a lot of good filmmaking there and tension building.
And some like
And
close-ups on the face.
exactly. And it's one of those kinds of things where it's like we see that in a Western so often. Like
Hmm.
this felt like, wow, this is kind of like where that really came from, kind of thing. And then, of course, the giant shootout at the end. There's one shot of all of the bad guys lining up. And I'm just like, this is a big scene. And then they all come riding in and like circling the house, cutting between the house and outside the house and everything. Those are all like really big things at this point. And having some sense of logic is a big deal
Hmm.
because filmmaking's hard.
Yeah.
And especially at a time where like this wasn't a big thing that happened a lot. So I do find this like this film, I think if you're gonna watch it and you're going in with all the baggage of all the westerns that have come after it, you're gonna say it. I feel like it's always the challenge of like it's all gonna be like, well, I've seen this before. I'm like, but people then didn't see this before, kind
Hmm.
of thing. And it isn't even like I remember when John Carter came out and people were like, it's so derivative. I'm like, yeah, because everything ripped off John Carter. And now John Carter as a film now doesn't seem very interesting because everything else has done it already since. But like this was made long before so many other films, and it was really interesting for me having seen so many westerns to see like the planting of seeds of things that you'll see in other ones. But I do agree, it's the narrative feels like a checklist instead of something we're living in.
Hmm.
It's just like introduce these characters, this happens, so that person does that thing, and then it all happens,
Hmm.
and you don't really feel too connected along the way emotionally.
Hmm.
But as like an actual filmmaking process, this is a really well made film. And
Hmm.
you could definitely tell that John Ford has a lot in there and certainly make some amazing films after this. But do you have any other thoughts?
I would just say like it's not the kind of movie you're gonna watch and be like engrossed in, like you're tense and you're sweating bullets, like in the way
Mm-hmm.
that you would a movie nowadays. But I would say it's worth watching, like if you just want to see like the origins of cinema and the origins of John Ford, kind of like you're saying. Um, so yeah, just like know what you're getting into, that you're gonna watch it more like from a historical perspective rather than an entertainment perspective, would be my sort of closing thought.
Absolutely. Now, Foster, we're shifting gears now into our recommendations. So, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
Okay, so I've barely watched anything the past month because of my work has been so busy. But
School,
say that again.
school.
Yes. But one that's stuck with me from like a week or two ago, which is already somehow on VOD, BlackBerry, which was actually the last episode I was on was the coming attraction. So
Yeah.
this got like pushed to VOD really fast. This is about the the origins of the BlackBerry device.
Mhm.
And it is like surprisingly good too. It's fun because it's got kind of a low budget. So like the I'm gonna quote my own Letterboxd review, but I said something in there that it feels like your best friend made a movie and it turned out to be great. Like that's the feeling I have when I watch this movie, is like the fact that it's so low budget and has these comedy actors and in these key roles, like it kind of makes it special, where it's like
Mhm.
Social Network is a perfect movie, but it's David Fincher, so
Yeah.
it's going to be a perfect movie. But like this is just like it's so easy to want to root for this movie because it shouldn't have been good. It was about it's about the BlackBerry, and
Mhm.
with like Jay Baruchel as the lead dramatic center of the movie, but it's amazing. Glenn Howerton is so good in this movie. He's I don't even have words for him. He's so fun to watch, and he a lot of shouting, but it's like
A lot of
his
shouting, but in the quieter moments, there's so many layers and little choices in his performance, his
yeah.
insecurities, because he's such a cocky asshole
Hmm.
and he's a shark.
Yeah.
He is a shark. But the thing is, you see so many insecurities under his nervousness when things aren't going right. And that's impressive acting.
Hmm.
And all I have to say is, Foster, what are what are the three letters of why people buy Blackberries? They effing work. I that
Yeah.
got me
He's
in the theater when I was
he's so good because he's like he could have easily gone just a bit too far to the point where it leans too much into the comedy, but it's like it's so perfectly like he's funny, but he's also kind of scary. Like at
Yeah.
the beginning when he like wrecks their office and like throws like the phone down or whatever. Doesn't wreck their office, but yeah, he's good. Jay Baruchel's really good. A lot of fun, like random small supporting people popping in there. Like Carrie Elways is in this too.
Yeah.
He has this one scene that cracks me up in the restaurant where he just starts laughing. Like, and the laugh he does is so good. Um,
And
reminds me of Liar Liar now that I'm thinking about it. He does a similar thing in there.
Michael Ironside.
Yeah.
He's scary
Hmm.
in this movie. It,
Yeah.
it is one of those kinds of things where it's just like it has such a great cast and like random character actor performances too.
Hmm.
And Jay Baruchel evolves throughout the film in an
Hmm.
impressive way.
As does his hairpiece.
Yes,
Hmm.
it sure does. Was it Matt Johnson is the director and his best friend?
Hmm.
Um, just such a character, such a
Hmm.
great character he plays. And like there one of my favorite shots in the whole movie is when they do like the whole office to gym thing to him at one point where he's just like and like the camera zooms in on him
Yeah.
like reacting to everything going on. But yeah, Blackberry's great. And if you haven't seen it, go check it out on VOD. I have a couple recommendations. It's been like I think 2.5 weeks since I recorded one of these episodes, so I've watched a lot since then. So I have certainly have things to recommend. So my new movie that I would like to recommend is "Hurt You Hurt My Feelings,"
Uh,
which I really loved that movie. I thought it was really great. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Tobias Menzies, I thought they were great together. It's one of those kinds of things where it's like you expect a giant blow off type moment, but it never gets there because it's not about that.
hmm.
And it's much more digestible. It's also really funny.
Hmm.
And I really love the character work and the performances. Something off my watch list that I wanted to recommend is Dawn of the Dead, the which I watched both of them. I would recommend both of them, but
Hmm.
the original one, it's so like it works so well as this zombie movie, but it's hilarious too. And it has so much to say about like that turning into the 80s capitalist, like soon to be Reaganomics
Hmm.
type era of our country. And like that's the whole entire point of them being in a shopping mall.
Hmm.
And the consumerism and everything. It's such a I can tell why it's such a classic. And even like the Zack Snyder version, like Zack Snyder's best movies.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really well directed and intense. And sit through the credits. You better sit through the credits all the way up until you hear the oh, and Down with the Sickness starts playing. I'm just like, because that was one of the one few things. Because I've seen bits of that movie before. That was one of the one things that I remembered is because Disturbed's in the credits.
Hmm.
And then one movie that I rewatched, which I'll actually be quoting later for my movie club, is Princess Mononoke, which is my favorite anime. It is such a sprawling epic with really impressive action, incredible creatures, and such an interesting thematic thread about nature and industrialization. And it's just an absolutely beautiful film and thrilling from start to finish. So,
Very
yeah.
nice. You might not believe it. I've not seen a single one of those three movies.
Well, there you go. Now you can go check them out.
Yep, you're killing me.
I'm just adding to your watch list.
I know what when I do not have the time right now. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And then that's all I'm gonna be doing.
I had that feeling when our semester ended. I'm like, thank God.
I know.
I'm just like, huh, summer. Wonderful thing working in education. That
I
summertime
know.
comes. But Foster, thank you so much for coming on and being my first guest on my journey through John Ford.
Thank you for bringing me back. I haven't scared you away.
How many times I've brought you on my shows? I
I don't know,
don't
too many.
know.
Everybody's sick of me.
Stop it.
I'm sick of myself.
And we'll be figuring out the next time that you'll be coming on at some point. But next week, well, I'm going to be doing Bucking Broadway. And my wife, Jess, is going to be joining me for that episode of Welcome to the Wasteland. But Foster, thank you so much for coming on again.
Thanks again.
And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.